Dilly, welcome back to the podcast. It's been a while. How are you doing?
Thank you very much for having me, Alex. It's been amazing, mate. It's been an incredible journey so far since our last chat.
Yeah, so last time we spoke about the product Toxin Prevent, and we talked about histamine and sort of histamine intolerance, histamine metabolism, and detoxification. But today we're going to be diving into vitamin D. We were just talking off air that actually there's a little segue maybe into talking about histamine from a vitamin D perspective. But I guess to set the scene, are you happy maybe just to do a little bit of a high level introduction into vitamin D? A lot of people are obviously aware that it's important to supplement throughout the majority of the year in the UK. But most people, I guess, think about it primarily from an immune perspective, for example. So are you happy to just sort of break it down a little bit and then we'll go into some of the finer details?
Yeah, yeah, happily. The thing is, where do you begin with vitamin
Yeah.
D? Like you start the conversation like, oh, should we talk about the sunshine? Should we talk about supplementation? And I think it all boils down to the fact of where it's how it activates in the system. I think the most important part for me is like vitamin D synthesis, and we've kind of been told this story of like, if you go into the sun for 2 weeks, you've got enough vitamin D for the rest of the year. Or we've been told if you get vitamin D in the sun in the summer, you don't need it in the winter. And I think that's just not true for us in the UK. Like, I think the main point is like, for anyone that's north of the equator, our vitamin D levels are like so low. I think the last time I read a report, they said about 90% of anyone above the north equator had deficiency. 90%.
Wow.
That's crazy. That's like crazy figures. And we have people don't understand that the vitamin D binding proteins and how they work in the system. So should we start with the sunshine? Should we explain how the
Yes,
sunshine works?
go for it.
So we have UVA rays and UVB rays, and it's UVB rays is what we need. And the only time we can get UVB rays is between 12 and 2. After that, it's just UVA rays and you're just topping up on your tan. So people think like at 4 p.m., if they're sitting in the sun, lounging out, having a glass of wine, you're getting the sun, you're getting vitamin D. You're really not. You're just tanning. And so UVB rays hit the skin, and when they hit the skin, they bind with cholesterol, and cholesterol sits into the surface of the skin, and that binds to the vitamin D. And then you have these, they're called vitamin D binding proteins, that then gets pulled in to the liver. And when it's in the liver, it goes through a process called hydroxylation, where it's converted from cholecalciferol to calciferdiol. And calciferdiol is the precursor to calcitriol. Now, to convert from calciferdiol to calcitriol, it's a lot of trials, I know. You have to go into the kidneys, and then the kidneys rehydroxylate it, and then it gets optimized. But what happens is when vitamin D hits that skin, your adipose tissues, especially if you're deficient, will pull that vitamin D in. So before it's even got to the calcitriol, you actually haven't activated it, and you're actually losing a lot of that vitamin D in that hydroxylation process. Because if you're deficient, your body's like, well, listen, you're not getting vitamin D much. I need to store this. I need to store this in the tissues. And we now know that, and we can say it quite clearly, vitamin D is a hormone. It's a hormone our body needs. And I think there's a lot of confusion about how that vitamin D from the sunshine works. And the thing is, did you know, and this is factual, you can read all the research, I'll send you all the papers, that if you stand in the sun between, like I say, like a rule of thumb, like from 0 to 10 minutes, you will absorb around about 10,000 IUs of vitamin D. 10,000. And
Okay.
then if you stand it for 20 minutes, it's 20,000, 30 minutes, 30,000. And it takes about 30 minutes for the skin to burn. So you've got half an hour is a lot of time. So if you're inputting 10,000 IUs, what makes you think supplementing 4,000 IUs is enough vitamin D?
Mm.
That's crazy, right? You just think like just think about that narrative. But the issue is this, and this is the big one, is 10,000 IUs is enough vitamin D for 1 day. That's your minimum level for 1 day. That's not for the winter. That's just for that 1 day. So to think that you stand in the sun on Monday and go, I've got enough vitamin D from this from the sun then is bollocks. It is. It just doesn't make sense. And the thing is, people think that taking the sunshine is enough, but vitamin D is a hormone. Your body utilizes it. Your immune system utilizes it. You need vitamin D to link the innate and adaptive immune system. And that vitamin D is what kind of brings that link and making sure that you're adapting to viruses and colds and bacterias, and it's being used up. So do you think getting sunshine on a Monday is enough to like work for the rest of the summer? No, because it's being used up every single day. So vitamin D, and I can't stress this enough, should be taken every single day. Whether you're in the sun or you're not, you should be supplementing vitamin D.
Okay, that's interesting. And I guess in some ways goes against, as you say, some of what we might hear in regards to supplementation. Um, so I guess, you've touched on sort of the metabolism and the breakdown of vitamin D, which I think is really important for people to understand
Yeah.
because, what you've mentioned there already starts to indicate that there are some key considerations when we think around forms of supplementation and things like this. So do we need to kind of dive a little bit deeper into that, or where do we go from here in regards to sort of the metabolism and the impact that has?
I mean, there is like an argument around about genetic SNPs and vitamin D and not getting enough of it. And so some people can't tolerate cold calciferol supplements. And so we do, we need sometimes to look at other forms of it. So I know we have like injections into the skin and people like, do the vitamin D injections. I know a couple of companies like Get a Drip doing, really, really massively around it. And there's other things like, taking liposomal vitamin Ds and sprays. I know better you do a spray vitamin D, which is just, they've done really, really well in the vitamin D community. And the thing is, like, cold calciferol is great, but a lot of people, like, we when we do testing, we'll test people's levels. And we used to do all these like events and stuff, Alex. And I'd have clinicians come up to me and they'll be like, "Oh, can I get my vitamin D tested?" Because we've got our 15-minute rapid vitamin D test. And we would test them and the results would be on the floor. They'd be at like, seven, 7 or 10
Oh,
nanomoles or
wow.
30 nanomoles, and they'll be like, and we got called frauds. They said, they're like, Dilly, your test doesn't work. That's bullshit. And I'll be like, well, okay. How much vitamin D are you supplementing? And they'll be like, oh, 4,000 IU. And I'll be like, well, your body you need 10,000 IU per 70 kilos of body weight to push your blood level up by 2.5 nanomole. So
Okay.
2.5 nanomole, which is 1 nanogram. So if you're taking 4,000 IU, you're not even touching that area. And so when you look at the cholecalciferol supplementation, it's not that cholecalciferol is bad, or it's just that you're not getting enough. You're not getting enough of that vitamin D, and your body's also utilizing that vitamin D. And so that's where kind of like our journey began into like calciferdiol. And as I explained, cholecalciferol becomes calciferdiol. And that conversion is really, really important. But as I was saying, the adipose tissues, we now know this, that the research is there. The adipose tissue is pulling that vitamin D in. And so before it can even be converted into calciferdiol, it's already been used up. So when you actually get converted to calcitriol, which is the active form, that's not lasting, there's not enough of it in there. So you're not actually feeling the benefit. So you're taking this vitamin D, and all you do is just make an expensive, you're just purchasing vitamin D and just taking it willy-nilly. You need to be, consistent, taking a minimum of 10,000 IUs. And so that's where kind of like my journey came into calciferdiol, into like the history of it. I don't know if you want to hear, do you want to hear the history of how I got into calciferdiol?
Yeah, please.
So like
That that smile suggests there's a story there.
Oh, there's a story there. So, like, uh, you know, everything has a story, right? And everyone's has a joke. Like, like if you talk to any clinician, you'll say, "Why did you become a clinician?" And they'll be like, "Because my journey in health, da 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 da. Like, I had this
Mm.
health problem and I wanted to fix it, or my kid had this health problem." And so, like, I kind of sat with vitamin D, and one of my friends who passed away, Dr. Lars von Oleshik, shout out to him, one of the greatest vitamin D doctors I ever met. He introduced me to vitamin D, and I was looking at cholecalciferol. And when we bought the vitamin D test, like the rapid vitamin D test, I was sat and one of the industry pioneers said to me, and I won't name him just in case, he said to me, he goes, Dilly, I think you're missing a trick here. Why are you offering the rapid test but not bringing a vitamin D supplement out? And I was just like, yeah, I don't want to because there's so many out. And then as I kind of like learned about what I said there, I started looking at like the forms of vitamin D, and I started looking at the history of vitamin D. And that kind of blew my mind a little bit when I started looking at the history of like sanatoriums. I don't know if you ever heard of sanatoriums before.
Yeah, I think so. But yeah, expand.
So sanatoriums were called light therapy healing centers. And you had baniotherapy, heliotherapy, which is
Yeah.
like sea salt therapy, so salt water. Then it was like air therapy, so like getting oxygen into the system. And in the 1920s, if you look at the history of vitamin D, sanatoriums were set up all across like the world. There were some really good ones in Sweden. That's why Sweden are known for like their health, and in Germany as well. But in the UK, in 1928, we used to have these sanatoriums. One of them was actually where I live, which is like Royal Leamington Spa. They used to have like this. They had like used to have this healing. They called it healing water, and it
Wow.
was water that was mineralized. And people would come, and in the summer, you would dip yourself into the water, remineralize. And as we know, a cofactor of vitamin D is you need magnesium and K2 and boron. So they dip themselves into the water, and the magnesium would leach into their skin, and then they would stand in the sunshine between 12 and 2. They would be doing activities like yoga, they'd be stretching, kids would be playing games, and you'd be getting that lovely sunshine into your skin. Therefore, like things like rickets disease were being treated. And so that history kind of came out, and I was like, this is crazy. They've actually they were doing that 1928s, but now we're told you can't be in the sun for too long because of skin cancer. I
Mm.
understand that. I get the science. I get the rule, like the I get the the census by it. But what they didn't say was that you could stand in the sun for up to 30 minutes. And that's what like blew my mind. And so I thought to myself, okay, so we're not allowed to stand in the sun without putting like literally coating ourselves with SPF 50. You literally, SPF 50 is one of the biggest sold products. So, but then people go to the sunshine and be like, I'm getting my vitamin D. You're not. If you're wearing anything above a skin factor of 10, you're actually not taking any vitamin D into the skin because it's blocking it out. And then I looked at cholecalciferol supplements and I thought, okay, so cholecalciferol is the biggest one around. And then one of my contacts rang me and they said, Dilly, I need to introduce you to someone. I said, okay, who is it? And his name's James Twan. And I said, okay, cool, let me introduce you to him. And I met and got introduced like this what was a researcher. And I want to call him professor because he is a professor, but he's a businessman who just like he was doing research years and years ago. So 25 years ago now, his company created calcifidiol supplementation.
Huh.
And I'll tell you what they did it for. It was because of pigs, cows, and chickens. So when mass manufacturing food came about,
Mm.
I don't know if you watch all the Netflix series on like, like the cowspiracy theories and stuff, where they're putting cows into like the massive containers and breeding them. But what was happening, these chickens and cows were getting rickets disease and they were like getting bone deficiencies. And they knew it was because of vitamin D. But the problem was they couldn't risk getting whole calciferol into calcifidol into calcitriol. They couldn't get to calcitriol because they didn't know how toxic it could be, because we've been told there's like level of toxicity. And so he said, like, what can we do? And they realized that you could convert to calcifidiol. And what they did was they started giving these animals calcifidiol. So they created demosterol and they pulled the vitamin D out of it, created calcifidiol and started giving it to these animals. And would you believe the bone density deficiency stopped? They started getting stronger. So they realized that they needed to also use the vitamin D. And they didn't tell this to anyone for viruses, because they know that vitamin D plays a role in bacteria and viruses. So they knew that vitamin D, impacted the immune system. So 25 years ago, Monsanto came in, and what did they do? Bought them out. Literally written them a check and said, "We're buying you out." And the technology got brought into the food chain, and they were putting that into the feed for the animals, and they were giving vitamin D to the animals. So calcifidiol was told that it was for animal consumption. So their vitamin D's are optimized. And do you know like these mushrooms that have got vitamin D into them, or like the steak with vitamin D and the eggs with vitamin D? That's James's research. He's the guy that did that. That's his
Wow.
data. And then he came to me and he was like, Dilly, what's your interest in calcifidiol? And I said, I'm getting told about these genetic SNPs and people not getting enough vitamin D. And people like, like you're in your house. And as people know, you're a dad. So how much time do you get in the sun? Barely anything.
Yeah.
I'm stuck in my office. I'm stuck at home with my little one, so we don't get sun. And so I said, if you're taking cold calciferol but not getting enough of it, you're stuck to the 4,000 I use. Then how could we make it better? And he said, I'll give you calcifidiol. So I started arguing with different people, started doing my research, got into the data a bit, got the safety data, proved that it was completely safe for human consumption. And then that's how vitamin D became about. We created vitamin D as calcifidiol. And when we ran the tests and the studies, we actually showed when you took vitamin D as calcifidiol, you increased vitamin D levels by 3.2 times. So your vitamin D levels would just rapidly go up. And the reason being is because it circumvented the liver to go directly into the kidneys, where it became hydroxylated into calcitriol. And when it became
Um,
calcitriol, your vitamin D levels came up and you felt the benefits. How cool is that?
That's brilliant. And that is a really good story. I always love hearing like the background, the history, because so much has gotten lost ultimately, hasn't it? I've certainly heard of heliotherapy before. And you often see some of those posts on social media around how we used to use sunshine a lot more than we now do. And as you've said, a lot of people are scared by the sun these days because of what we're told. So thank you for giving us kind of the backstory as well. I think one of the big things for me that's come out from that, Dilly, is actually the complexity within vitamin D supplementation. And it's obvious, the general public are certainly going to just think that they can take their vitamin D at the recommended dose and all will be well. But you've mentioned here genetic predispositions around the transport and sort of cellular receptor sensitivity to vitamin D that might influence the dose that's required. You've mentioned the cofactors like magnesium, K2, and boron. You've mentioned how body fat is like a reservoir ultimately that is going to have a big impact, I guess, on sort of the dose that's required. So as a result of that, I guess personalizing someone's dosage and understanding what that is an important part to this. And you've mentioned the rapid vitamin D test. Um, can you just, I guess, for our practitioners, maybe just shed a little bit more light on that? Where is it? How can they get hold of it? Because having a test that you can do in clinic that after 15 minutes is going to give your clients readings is an incredibly helpful bit of kit. And then I know off air we mentioned around sort of your kind of equation, for want of a better word, that kind of helps us understand what the dose may be based on our client's data. So it'd be great to kind of unpick that a bit more.
Yeah. Oh, thank you for bringing that up, Alex. So the vitamin D testing was quite interesting. Like I said before, Dr. Lars van Olderschik, he's the guy that ignited my what like need into vitamin D because I'll tell you the funny story. How I got introduced to that vitamin D test machine was I was sat in a bar in Germany and Lars pulled this out. We were just sat because we have like our annual yearly meetings and stuff, and we were sat down and he tested my vitamin D levels. And when he tested them, I didn't have a clue what he was talking about. Like I didn't know anything about vitamin D then. I was quite naive to it, and I just knew that we needed to take it. Didn't know much about it, and the rapid test because he worked in laboratories. He was in IVD diagnostics. His whole background's around diagnosis, mostly like anything from like genetics through to vitamin D and supplementations and like immune function. And he basically said that the laboratory testing was excellent, but the problem was the vitamin D levels fluctuate between 10 to 30% daily. So they're constantly fluctuating. So you could test at 9 o'clock and then you could test at 10, 11 o'clock and your vitamin D is fluctuated. And the reason being is because not many people realize, but like the vitamin D has a half-life. So calcitriol, the active form, has a half-life of 8 hours. Calcifidiol, which is the vitamin D product, has a half-life of 15 days, and
Wow.
cholecalciferol has a half-life of 60 days. So after that, it starts depleting. So this kind of argument of, oh, I had sunshine in the summer and I'm fine, doesn't make sense. Like that's out the window because we know the half-lives now. So he said, if you could rapidly test someone and get their results, you could accurately get their results on that spot there. And don't get me wrong, laboratory testing is brilliant and it's very useful, and still I would still recommend it because
Mm.
rapid vitamin D testing is just one angle. But what it does is that you finger prick the person, get a small like 10 microliters of blood, run it through our system, and it gives you the exact nanogram per milliliter and exact nanomole per liter. But the thing was, when you got the results, you were thinking, what the hell does this even mean? Because it's just results. It just tells you what it is.
Mm,
So Lars went with the Vitamin D Council and they started looking at the calculations and working out how to optimize your levels. And they built the vitamin D chart. You can get it from us. Well, we can send it out. I'll send it to you, Alex. You can share it part of the podcast.
thank
And
you.
what they did is they looked at the levels and they said, if I'm at, let's say, 10 nanomoles per liter, or how do I get to 50? How do I get to 100? How do I get to 150? And then they looked at body weight, and that's when that figure came out. You need 10,000 IUs of vitamin D per 70 kilo of body weight to push your blood level up by 1 nanogram per milliliter, or 2.5 nanomoles. And so they said like 10,000, because they realized that if you go in the sun, 10,000 IU for 10 minutes, that's a daily dose. That pushes that level up. And then as the half life goes in, it goes down. So you're kind of filling it up whilst it's going down, filling it up. And so they then looked at that calculation, and they realized that there was a calculator you could build from it. And then that calculator came around. Now, I won't explain the calculator, but it too much. But it basically it gets your tested level, your target level, works that figure out, and then it divides your body weight by 70 kilos. You times those two together, and you get how many IUs of vitamin D you need to get to your target. And obviously your half-life is not coming into control of that, but it means that you can say to a client or even yourself and say, right, I need 400,000 IUs. That doesn't mean you go and stab yourself with 400,000 IUs. Your body only has so much capacity that it can convert. What you need to do is you take 10,000 every single day for 40 days, and you've hit your target. You'll be not if not hit it, you'll be close to it. And when we brought that calculation out, oh my God, Alex, the feedback, my friend, the feedback we've had from people, because they've actually looked at the calculator, used it, and they're going, oh my God, like one guy said to me, he goes, Dilly, I've had chronic hip pain, gone. He goes, chronic
Wow.
hip pain, gone. We had 4 police officers who did a part of a rapid vitamin D test. All 4 of them jokingly started taking vitamin D. Whole of the precinct got the cold flu virus during Christmas. Those 4, nothing. And they couldn't believe it. One of them said to me, he goes, my wife is so angry because I told her to take the vitamin D. She didn't take it. And he goes, she got the cold.
Ah,
I didn't get it. And I was like, and that just blew my mind. I was like, yes, we're onto something here.
that is really interesting. And that's, you raise a good point around the vitamin D research around pain as well. I guess that's another key thing for people to be mindful of ultimately as well.
Yeah, I think the vitamin D research is changing that climate around it. I think Dr. John Campbell, who's on YouTube, I think he does a lot of talks about like vitamin D, and he's sat down with all like the various vitamin D like icons in the industry. And I know like a lot of them are like saying, "Oh, it's a conspiracy. Oh, it's a conspiracy." And I know like some of them are saying like, you need to understand it. And I do get that. I see where they're coming from. I've read through a lot of their research and a lot of their data and what they're looking at. And I think vitamin D is now being looked at with a lot of scrutiny because
Mm,
we know that it's got a lot of benefits. And dare I use the C word? And I don't just mean like, cancer. I mean, COVID as well. Like both of them are playing major roles in it. You look at Dr. Tina Pierce. She talks about using vitamin D optimization with part of her long COVID protocols. And the thing is, there's so much research and data coming out now on vitamin D because there's a keen interest in it because we've realized that in the 1928s, when those results came out, it was kind of like lambasted, but we also need to look at the effects. And and then someone said to me the other day, I think it's the Scientific Association, SACN, I've got the Scientific Advisory Committee of Nutrition, and they've got like their minimum levels that they set. And like there's a couple of people like, oh, it's a conspiracy. They're like purposely keeping the vitamin D levels down because they want to make more people sick. And that's not the case. The problem that they have is that you've got a person who's got taking a source from the sun. You don't know if they've gone on holiday. They're eating food with vitamin D and then supplementing, and then they're taking multivits with vitamin D in. They have so many sources of vitamin D. We don't know what the safety of recommend daily allowance actually is. And when you kind of look at the RDA, they've kind of ascertained that like you need to have 4,000 IUs at the bare minimum, but that's because they're not using testing. But when you bring in testing into it and you test your vitamin D levels, you can then ascertain, right, this person is this much deficient by, and they need to get to this level, or this person's levels are really too high, and they need to stop taking vitamin D for X amount of days, and then start supplementing again. And I think that, like I've said to a lot to the committees, I've said to them, listen, you need to change your vitamin D, charts and everything. But the way you need to do it is to say to people, get tested. That's
Mm,
it. Simple. Get tested.
yeah.
It's literally that simple, isn't it? And like, and I know the question you're going to ask me is, Dilly, how often should we test? Right?
Yeah.
Every 3 months. Every 3 months. Like every 3 months, you should do a vitamin D test. Like you should be testing every 3 months to know where you're at and where you need to go. But I guarantee you, and I will bet my last bottom pound on it, that if you optimize your vitamin D levels, you will feel the difference quickly.
Yeah. And I guess a question that comes up around the testing is there, based on what you've shared, is there an argument that we really want to be testing at the same time of day when we're retesting? Or
No,
would it still just oscillate independent of that anyway?
oscillating independent of that. It's still
Okay.
gonna it's still gonna like oscillate, I think, and
Okay.
it's still gonna change. But like I think one of the scariest things I found with vitamin D is this kind of upper level limit and like talking about toxicity levels. Now, like Alex, how long have you been clinician for now?
Uh, a lifetime.
Yeah. So, and have you ever come across someone with vitamin D toxicity?
Uh, no, there is one case that comes to mind, but it wasn't ultimately.
Okay, cool. So the case that you're talking about, case that I always ask this question at like lectures and talks, and I've asked this before. I say to people, like, give me your case of toxicity, and people kind of like go, yeah, I heard, and I'm like, no, I want to know. Give me the person who got toxic levels. And by the way, this is a shout out to anyone. If you've got someone with toxic levels, can you send them over to me? I want to know. I want to personally test their vitamin D levels and see what the toxic level is. So I've been through the toxic levels. I've like gone through the clinical trials, and the clinical trials that are like I spoke about a lot is that there's one from Veith, one from Ekwaru, and one from Jones, and there's another one from India. And I looked at the studies that they were talking about, and each of these studies have been misquoted. And I don't know why they've been misquoted, but they said in all the papers, and I'll send them to you. Like, just do your own research. Like I've done mine, so I want you to, if you've got a question about it, I'll send you the research, have a read through. And they said that the toxic level of vitamin D is 750 nanomoles to 500 nanomoles. Now, just think about that 750 to 500 nanomoles, right? And we're told 50 nanomoles is where you need to get to optimize levels of vitamin D, right? That's a big, big difference. That's like a factor of 10 off, right? And so they said for safety, you should have your vitamin D levels at 250 nanomoles. That's a toxic level. That's where you go above toxicity. And they did that because they wanted to have safety in the numbers. They said if we get to 500, because we'd never push someone to 500 750, we don't know the effects of someone. It could be like they get really toxic, they get really unwell, their bones start like their muscles start cramping. We just don't know. So they said for safety, let's get people to 250 nanomoles. And I read the study and I was just like, are you kidding me? Like, are you actually taking the mick? Like, these guys have actually turned around and they're looking at the vitamin D levels and they're saying that it's a lot, like a lot higher than it needs to be. So why the hell is everyone saying it needs to be 50 nanomoles? I still don't know the answer. That's one answer I've never got. I've asked every single person. I've asked the different authorities. I've asked nutritional therapists. I've asked vitamin D doctors, and everyone just kind of goes, I don't know. But these are the papers. These are the papers that you're quoting. So why is it set differently? And that question really bugs me quite a lot. And if anyone's got the answer, please do send it over to me. But I kind of feel like even the vitamin D levels need to be reflected because the human body is changing so much, and vitamin D toxicity needs to be looked at and scrutinized under a different light, I think. And I think quoting papers from the 1990s and 2000s, though powerful, times have changed. our level of science has changed. I think we need to now establish that the upper level limit is much more higher because our genetics and our bodies have changed so much. I don't know what your opinion on that is.
I'm not sure. I must admit, vitamin D is not something I've done a deep dive in. It's kind of on my list this year to look into more. And I think everything you've shared today is just another reason why it's important, as you just said there, to kind of to do your research. I think there's so much to be said around either data getting lost because sometimes it's just old. You know, you've been talking about practices from the 20s in the UK, for example. So yeah, I'm absorbing it all, Dilly, processing.
Excuse the pun, right? Excuse the pun.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think like it is. I think the our understanding of the science has now changed, and there's so many like you've got doctors coming up on Instagram who are like becoming nutritionally aware and becoming FM practitioners, and I think which is just absolutely incredible. Like, what a time to live in! Like, what a
Mhm.
time! What a time! What like hats off to the people that are looking at nutrition in a different, understanding it and absorbing it in. But what I always laugh about is like, I don't know, I've got friends who aren't nutritionally trained and they'll say stuff like, oh, I got my vitamin D today, I ate some eggs. Oh, I got my vitamin D today, I had some steak. And I'm like, oh my God, like you do realize an egg has about 80 IUs of vitamin D. And I've just told you that 10,000 is like a daily dose. What makes you think eating two eggs or one egg is going to like hit your vitamin D levels? It's not even close to it. And so like I just always say to people that I'll encourage them, quite rightly, that you need to kind of test on yourself a little bit more as well. And like
Mhm.
even when my partner, when she was pregnant, we were looking at her vitamin D levels, and she's an NT, so like she read the papers, and I kind of said to her like, oh, there's like Professor Stamp in 1977 did the research on pregnancy and vitamin D, and he said that a pregnant woman should be consuming anything between 20 to 30,000 IUs per day.
Wow.
1977, he said that. 1977, he said that, and that was like said they like lambast like, that date was there, and he actually did that trial, I think, on 400 expecting women, if I remember the study correctly. So that's quite a lot of people. Like normally we get away with doing 10 or 12 people, but he did like he did that on 400 people. And I showed it to T and I was like, what do you think of this? And she read through and she went, huh, maybe I should up my levels. So we up to levels to see what we did. We tested her, we went through it. And my daughter Rivi, like she's done fantastically. Her growth is on par, everything's on track. So, and we tested Tracy's vitamin D levels, and they're at like I think like 70 nanograms per milliliter, which is about 100 and so that's 70 times. My math is awful, about 160, 165 nanomoles, bit per bit there. And
Okay.
if you tell someone that, they're like, oh, your vitamin D levels are too high. Like,
Mhm.
do you know your vitamin D levels, Alex?
Not at the moment. I think it was probably autumn when I last did a test, actually.
Okay.
But they were, I always forget the units, but it was just over 100, whatever the unit is.
Okay, cool. Yeah, which is good. Like that's like a really good level of vitamin D. But I think Dr. John Roberts, one of my friends, he submitted to me. He sent me an email on New Year's. He said, "Dilly, this year we're going to push our blood levels above 250." I'm like, "Yeah, cool, let's do it." I said, "Let's do it. Let's just go to town and kind of do it." And I think if you are serious about health, and everyone who's listening to this is definitely about health, I would say get tested, send us the vitamin D levels, and we'll do the calculate together, and we'll optimize your levels. And I think we should be able to talk about it more and say what your symptoms are. And I guarantee you, people will come back going, "Huh, I'm happier. Oh, I feel really good. Oh, my muscles are not hurting as much. Oh, I'm not getting ill as much." Guarantee you, the feedback is going to be absolutely amazing. What do you reckon, Alex?
I'm up for it. Yeah. I mean, we can definitely share a link in the show notes and in the description of the video on our YouTube page and give people that opportunity to reach out to you, Dilly, for sure. With the rapid test, is that available to anyone? Is it a sort of a practitioner device, or how can people access it?
So, firstly, it's Balin's approved. Yes, Balin's
Okay.
approved it. We went through that rigmarole of getting the IVD across them and showing them the registration documents and getting their approval, and they're happy to insure practitioners on it. And so it's available on a website. You just kind of like you purchase the vitamin D device, and once you purchase it, we basically you get the kit. And when you receive the kit, you send the team an email, and they go, right, we'll book you in for a one-on-one training, and it's all one-on-one. We don't do like we can do group trainings, but I prefer one-on-one, so it gets a bit of a question and answer with the person, and then we teach them how to use the vitamin D testing machine. It's the most easiest thing. It's complicated when you look at it from the start, but once you do a test, you're like, oh my God, I can do these for jokes.
Right.
And so we train you up. We then fill in a form, and it says, is this person trained off? Like like the normal like jumping through everything.
Yeah.
And then you do the training module, very easy. And then I send you a certificate which says you're an official vitamin D tester. And then you just start testing. You can bring up Balins and say, will you insure me on this? And they'll go, yep, no problem at all. And it's literally as simple as that. And you just start testing people, test people for anything. We're trying to change the government legislation on vitamin D testing to bring it into GP practices at the moment as well. Like we're
Oh, wow.
working hard to try and change it. Like the I'm very fortunate that I've met a lot of like medical professionals in the industry who've supported it, and a lot of dentists. And like some of these dentists, like there's a couple of dentists in London. Wow. Like one of them said to me, he goes, Dilly, I will not let anyone have tooth extraction. Like, the was it the crown? We put the crown into it, is it?
Yeah.
Crown, is it? He said, I will not do anything unless I test your blood levels and they're above 150 nanomoles. He goes, I will not touch you. He goes, but if I get your vitamin D levels to that, he goes, I have a 99.9999% success rate. And he goes, I have no issues. And the patient feedback is brilliant. He's actually one of my best customers, like literally just buys our test strips because he tries to test every single patient, and he built it into the cost of the practice because he was just like, it's so important for dental health.
Mm. That's really interesting. I love when you can get those kind of anecdotal bits of evidence and the experience of practitioners, because in some ways it's such valuable information. So that's super interesting. And I think, the oral microbiome sort of space is obviously exploding. So connect that with the vitamin D and you've got some really interesting data coming out.
Yeah, I was like oral microbiome. Blimey, we could do another podcast on that. Like we spent, I don't know how many euros on developing our toothpaste, and yeah, the oral microbiome is just absolutely fascinating. And I think brings on to that topic of inflammation. Talking about inflammation, we were saying before, and I think a lot of people don't. I say to a lot of like the average Joe, though, I say, do you know your gut starts in your mouth? That's your first. That's your first point of everything. Your mouth is
Yeah.
what your whole body subjects itself to, because when you chew, the enzymes are released in your mouth and the nutrients are absorbed. Is the reason why we create those liposomal supplements underneath the tongue. But if you've got poor oral hygiene or your gut is very inflamed, you can tell by the person's mouth and what's going on, the inflammation there. And that then goes further down. And I think T said to me yesterday, and I like, you don't think about something, and you just like, she kind of like gave me an aha moment. She went, well, if you've got gut issues, you should always start with the mouth because you need to start from the top down approach, not from a bottom up approach. I was like, I've been working in the microbiome area for like 2, 3 years now, and I didn't even think of that. I was like, of course, you start with the mouth first. Genius, like, the idea of it. And I think that's, you hit the nail on the head there. The mouth is the starting point of it, then into the
Mm.
stomach, dealing with what's up there, because that's the first point of digestion. And so if that's not digested up there properly, what do you think is going to happen to the intestines and the colon?
Yeah. We had Dr. Horolak on the podcast last year, and he has a PhD student and they both did a paper looking at SIBO testing
Yeah.
and the impact of rinsing the mouth before taking your breath samples. And they found that at least a subset of those participants had a different outcome, i.e., a different diagnosis based on whether actually they were rinsing that oral microbiome or not. So, I mean, it can even impact, breath testing from that perspective. It's really interesting.
I'm not surprised by that one bit.
Mm.
I'm not surprised by that one bit. I think like, going off, are we okay to go off the topic of vitamin D? Like
Yeah,
to
yeah,
go
of
into the
course.
microbiome. So like looking at the microbiome. So, I've been doing work with Sunny from Flore, the Sun Genomics guys, and because they do the whole genome metagenomic sequencing and looking into that. And I think the data. the things with the microbiome is that we just don't understand it. Like, even though we understand it, we don't understand it. Like, we literally just don't understand it. Like, we think we do, but like, I think breath testing and all that, the SIBO side of things, that that market in the next 5 years is just going to completely change, because they're showing now that if you can hack the gut microbiome, I don't like to use the word hack, because I think that just sounds like you're just trying to, like, you're just messing around with it. But I think if you can optimize the gut in a specific way, you can actually change the way your overall health is. And I know, like, everyone's piping on about Akkermansia mucifera, which is like the go-to thing now. Oh God, Alex, I found someone who spent £90 a month on an Akkermansia supplement. It blew my mind.
Yeah, I know. I've had many a conversation with clients and customers about this because I think it's now a bit cheaper, but I've been pleading with people for whatever. I think it came out to the market about 2 years ago now, maybe. And yeah, £90 for 30 capsules of a single strain probiotic. And you've got to question you've got to question what sort of the motive is behind all of this. But yeah, I
Should I
was
give
like
you a
at the
cheap
start
trick?
fully.
Should I give you?
Huh?
Should I give you a trick? To give everyone a little thing? So when we did the research in Akkermansia mucifera, when I was looking at the data for it, if do you know where they get the Akkermansia from?
No.
Okay, so it's going to be the simplest thing, and you're going to kick yourself when you find out where it's from. It's from pomegranates.
Oh, is it actually from pomegranates?
It's from pomegranates. So pomegranates have, I forgot what the chemical is now. Sorry. Normally I'd read up on these things before, like we talked, so I just remember, like, jog my memory. But basically, they extract it from pomegranate, and because it has a certain cell in there that works to increase akkermansia. If you go to the gym, if you're working out, if you're going for a long walk, and you're got an empty stomach, come home. The first thing that you do is eat some pomegranate. You will increase your akkermansia. And when we did gut testing and we looked at gut testing and we looked at it, people who were eating pomegranate, we actually saw that akkermansia was actually at a very good level, because you don't want to increase your akkermansia too much because it will
Yeah.
degrade the intestinal lining and you will get a leaky gut. So you've got to be really careful with it. Hence why they say, have a range of a diet, but it's from pomegranate. So if you want to circumvent the supplementation, you can eat pomegranates.
When you say it's from pomegranate, are you meaning that? Because I know from Dr. Horolac, people often talk about pomegranates as kind of it has a polyphenol that helps feed Akkermansia. But are you saying that the Akkermansia probiotic actually had come from it?
The one that I saw did. It was like a
Okay.
French company, I think it was. I think it was a
Oh.
French company, and that, like, just the person told me, and I looked into it, and I was like, "That's from pomegranates." And then it kind of clicked when I was talking to another doctor who I will not name, because they will kill me, and because they were telling me that when they go for a jog, they come home, and when we did their Akkermansia test, it was really, really, they had really, really good levels. They were like 8% and then 11%, and they said that when they got home, they would get into the shower naked and open up a pomegranate and start eating it in the shower, because pomegranate stains everything. And they jogged my memory onto it. And then I asked a microbiologist, and Sunny was saying about it, and they were like, "Oh, we'll look into a bit more." And then I started doing the research into it and reading up about pomegranates. So don't quote me on it, but that's what I remember reading. But I think, like, we can do a topic about it afterwards. But yeah, pomegranates was just like, it blew my mind a little bit. And I've tried it myself when I'm training. I'll come back and I'll drink like pomegranate juice or have some pomegranate seeds.
Mm.
And I always find that, like, I didn't, like, it wasn't a case of like losing weight, but I felt more defined, if you know what I mean. And like, you felt a lot
Okay.
better. So that's why, like, I know there's a link there, but maybe I'll do some more research and we'll do another podcast about it.
Yeah, I mean, it's a really interesting one. I think because it can make up 5-7% of the overall microbiome, so it's obviously a really abundant organism within that ecosystem. And I know there is a study in humans where they were supplementing the probiotic Akkermansia, and there was improvement in certain cardiometabolic parameters like insulin sensitivity, I think was one of them they were looking at. But I'm always a little bit resistance when looking at this sort of thing where we're talking about one bacteria. Yes, it makes up a relatively large proportion compared to a lot of other bacteria, but I don't have any Akkermansia in my ecosystem, never will, unless I supplement with a probiotic ultimately. But it's not I think sometimes it can be easy to jump onto that and say, okay, well, that's why I've got issues with cardiometabolic disease, or that's why I'm struggling to lose weight or be lean. But on average, we've got what, 170-ish, hopefully, other species of bacteria in that large intestine. So it's that I think it's that tricky one where it's really fascinating and it's so interesting to go and look at the research, but we also have to rein it in and think, well, okay, I don't have any. It's not the end of the world. I can probably get by without it. And I think that's where what you were saying, Dilly, around do we fully understand it? Because it's likely that there's going to be other organisms with a similar genome that are able to have the same function within the system. And I think that's something that we're going to see a lot more of probably over the next year or more, is helping people understand that, when we talk about the microbiome, most of the time we're talking about the microbiota. We're not
Yeah.
talking about the microbiome.
Yeah, there's nothing that needs to be added to that because I think it's changing, it's constant, it's constantly changing, and like
Mm.
I can't stress enough. I always say to any clinician that's testing is test again. Once you've
Yeah.
tested, test again. Don't and like I really think like every patient that walks through your door, they should know that when they're committing to you, that they're committing to at least 2 or 3 tests or 4 tests because they need to be tested because the thing is we can ascertain what's going on not only by symptoms but symptoms are only one part of it and I like honestly the labs that are like like fortunate that the UK is like we've got like people like Regenerus and people like Genova in our midst that like can do off this testing and let's say the best one HealthPath in our midst that are actually testing people like the fact that you guys are able to test people and you're able to look at them from one perspective and to the second perspective is so important and like, even with the vitamin D, like the same thing, being able to
Mm.
test people for one path to go to the next bit, like, as that health path goes, let's be honest, like you've got like a link there. And I think like we should be testing. Testing is key to everything because it means we can see where we are, where we're going, and where we need to go. Just
Yeah.
imagine doing something blindly. Well, you're not gonna get you're not gonna get anywhere. You'll get results, but you're only gonna get so many results because you need to know, like, do I need to switch the person from this probiotic? Do I need to turn this person onto this supplement? Do I need to give them this supplement? And I think when you look at it like that and you explain it to people, they're like, oh yeah, that's very true. Because you go to a GP and you get your medication, but your GP, you come in and say, Doc, it's not working. Their response is to increase the medication to get it to work. That's a response that they've been given because they don't have time. They don't
Mm.
have time to deal with people. They have like a 10-minute window on my podcast with not podcast, sorry, my YouTube with Dr. Tina Pierce. I was speaking to her about it, and Tina said to me, she goes, Dilly, we've had like patients come in where their doctor has said to them, you have 10 minutes and you can tell me one symptom, and that's all I'm going to help you with. So you imagine someone with the like histamine overload, or they come in and you've got multiple symptoms that are always fluctuating and changing and you tell them one symptom, then you just give them famotidine or you give them cetirizine hydrochloride. You're not going to get a result from it. And like, I think now, like the nutrition landscape is changing so much, and you're going to see I think we're going to see so much happen in the next 10 years with the nutrition industry, where you're going to see doctors who will become nutritionally trained. I guarantee you'll see that. I guarantee it because now we know that if we want people to live not longer, because living longer doesn't matter, doesn't mean jack all. Living healthier. That's the key, isn't it? It's not living longer, it's living healthier. And I think that's going to change so much.
Yeah, absolutely. And I'm so glad you brought up the concept of, the retest, because it's definitely something I'm a lot more conscious of these days when working with clients that, if we're doing a test, that actually clinically I often do find the repeat tests more helpful. I mean, I do a lot of work clinically with sort of mold and mycotoxins now. So using that as a specific example, that second mycotoxin test can be much more helpful than the first and sometimes give you a much better indication of someone's total body burden. But as you say, that retest in a different area of health is always gonna, it's like your North Star. It allows you to know, okay, this is the direction that we now need to go in. Um, so yes, thank you for raising that important point.
I,
Um,
yeah.
bringing it back to vitamin D, because I'm just mindful of time. Is there anything that we haven't covered yet, Dilly, that you want to cover in regards to it?
Not really. I don't think there's not really anything to add to it then, other than take it daily. Like take it, like get it into your system, take it daily. I don't give a monkeys if you're going on the holiday to, like, Tenerife or the Bahamas and you're going to get sunshine for 2 weeks. Yeah, no problem at all. Great. But take it daily. Doesn't matter, because like I said, think about the half-lives. Think about like the fact that your half-life is going to be going down after 60 days. That vitamin D from the sunshine, which is called calciferol, has gone down. Know that after 15 days, whether you're taking vitamin D and you're having it for the 15 days, it's gone down. If it's calcitriol, after 8 hours it's going down. Like, just be conscious of that, because
Mm.
if you're able to be conscious of it and you're testing, you will know when and how much to take it. And the thing is, it's so easy to remember. Just go, oh, in the morning, couple of vitamin D tablets, because you can use it alongside medication. There's no issues at all, and you will feel the benefits. But obviously, have your things like K2 and magnesium. They are beneficial. The K2 argument, I'm a bit on the fence about. I've been reading into it a little bit more. The magnesium one, great, like 100%. If you are not having a magnesium bath every day, sorry, every week, like you need to like jumping. I know you can't, because we're parents and we spend most of our time chasing after kids. But yeah, like I couldn't say it enough. Like, make sure you're having your magnesium. Make sure you look at K2. Have a little bit of boron here and there, and just look after yourself. And I think doing something so simple can have so many health benefits, because where vitamin D is part of our natural body. We need the sunshine. We need it.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. Dilly, thank you so much for sharing all of your experience, your insights, everything you've learned recently around sort of vitamin D. It's always a pleasure to listen to you talk. Um, we'll add links to everything you've mentioned in the show notes, so people will be able to check all of this out in more detail if they want to. Um, is there anything you'd like to conclude with,
No.
apart from take it every day?
No, Alex, I really appreciate the opportunity to talk about vitamin D. It's one of my favorite topics, and alongside histamine, just love it, absolutely love it. And yeah, please, if you do join us on our YouTube, I put a lot of content on there. Our Instagram, which is the Nouveau Healthcare, and I'm starting up a TikTok page and doing a lot of talk about different
Nice.
parts of aspects of it. And I think I just want to keep pushing this information out there and working with people like yourself, like-minded people who are just here to like offer these little snippets of interesting knowledge. So thank you once again, Alex, for having me.
No, my pleasure. And we'll do it again soon.
Cheers.